December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Through the pre-dawn darkness, General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein watched American positions through his binoculars with barely concealed contempt. The commander of Panzer Lehr Division had faced the British at El Alamein, the Soviets at Kursk, and now he was being asked to break through what German intelligence dismissively called the American kindergarten. "They send us children playing soldier," he remarked to his operations officer, observing the 106th Infantry Division's positions. Fresh from their farms and factories, thinking wars like their Hollywood films, this will be easier than Poland. What Bayerlein and the German High Command didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined in their professional arrogance, was that they were about to collide with something unprecedented in military history, an industrial democracy that had transformed ordinary citizens into the most effectively armed, supplied, and supported combat force ever fielded. Within 6 weeks, German professional contempt would transform into desperate respect as American firepower, logistics, and sheer industrial capacity crushed the Wehrmacht's final offensive. The story of how America's amateur army defeated Germany's military elite is not just about battles won and lost. It's about the collision between old world military tradition and new world industrial might, between professional warriors and citizen soldiers backed by the arsenal of democracy. The German military establishment had spent centuries cultivating professional excellence. The Prussian military tradition, dating back to Frederick the Great, emphasized rigid training, tactical brilliance, and warrior spirit. German officers studied warfare as an art form, attending elite academies where they memorized the campaigns of Napoleon and von Clausewitz. They viewed military service as a calling, separate from and superior to civilian life. By 1944, even after catastrophic losses on the Eastern Front, the Wehrmacht's officer corps maintained this sense of superiority. They had defeated France in 6 weeks, conquered most of Europe, and fought the Soviet Union to a standstill for 3 years. When American forces landed in North Africa in 1942, German commanders viewed them as wealthy amateurs playing at war. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, overall commander in the West, captured this attitude perfectly in a November 1944 staff meeting. The Americans are good soldiers individually, but they rely too heavily on material. They lack the warrior spirit, the battlefield cunning that comes from military tradition. They fight with machines, not with their souls. When we strike them hard, they will break like all amateur armies break. This assessment was shared throughout the German command structure. Intelligence reports emphasized American inexperience, their dependence on logistics, their reluctance to take casualties. German generals noted how American units would halt operations if supply lines were threatened, how they relied on overwhelming firepower rather than tactical maneuver, how they seemed more interested in safety than victory. What the Germans fundamentally misunderstood was that American military doctrine was deliberately designed around industrial capacity rather than martial tradition. The United States hadn't created a European-style professional army. They had created something entirely different, a system that turned ordinary citizens into effective soldiers through standardized training, overwhelming material support, and doctrine that emphasized combined arms coordination over individual heroism. The numbers told a story German commanders couldn't grasp. By December 1944, the United States was producing more military equipment in a single month than Germany had produced in the entire year of 1939. American factories delivered 8,000 aircraft monthly, 2,000 tanks, 50,000 trucks, and ammunition measured in billions of rounds. More importantly, American doctrine was built around this abundance. Where German soldiers were taught to conserve ammunition and count every shell, American troops were trained to solve problems with firepower. A standard American infantry division possessed more artillery than an entire German Army Corps. Battalion commanders could call in fire support that would have required corps-level authorization in the Wehrmacht. American privates carried more ammunition than German sergeants. The transformation of American civilians into soldiers was itself a marvel of industrial organization. Training camps that hadn't existed in 1940 were processing 30,000 men weekly by 1943. The program was standardized, efficient, and comprehensive. Every rifleman received identical training. Every unit practiced identical tactics. The system produced soldiers who might lack the intuitive battlefield sense of German veterans, but who understood their role in a larger machine perfectly. Private First Class Vernon Baker, who would later receive the Medal of Honor for actions in Italy, described the American approach. They taught us that we weren't heroes. We were parts of a system. The system had artillery, air support, tanks, engineers, medical corps, supply lines. Our job was to work the system, not to be brave individuals. Germans trained warriors. We trained technicians of warfare. The 106th Infantry Division, holding the line in the Ardennes that December morning, embodied both American military strengths and weaknesses. They had arrived in Europe just days earlier, one of the most inexperienced divisions in the theater. German intelligence knew this. It was one reason the Ardennes was chosen for the offensive. What German intelligence didn't know was that even this Green Division possessed capabilities that would have amazed professional German officers. Each American infantry regiment had an attached cannon company with 6 105mm howitzers. The division artillery comprised 4 battalions, with 48 105mm guns and 12 155mm howitzers. Beyond that, they could call on corps artillery, army artillery, and in emergencies, heavy bombers operating as flying artillery. A single American infantry division could deliver more explosive tonnage in one day than an entire German army had available for a week-long offensive. More significantly, every piece of this firepower was connected by radio. Company commanders had radio contact with battalion. Battalion had direct lines to artillery fire direction centers. Forward observers could adjust fire in real time. The system was designed so that overwhelming firepower could be concentrated on any threat within minutes. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the sophisticated maneuver warfare Germans practiced. But it was devastatingly effective when it worked. The German plan for Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes Offensive, was built on exploiting perceived American weaknesses. 3 German armies, totaling 30 divisions, including elite SS Panzer formations, would punch through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and drive to Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies and forcing a negotiated peace. The plan was operationally brilliant, tactically sophisticated, and strategically desperate. It assumed American units would collapse under determined assault, that American commanders would panic, that the vaunted American logistics would fail under pressure. It was the kind of daring operation that had worked for Germany in 1940. What had changed was that now they faced an enemy that could absorb punishment and respond with industrial-scale violence. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, German artillery opened fire along an 85-mile front. 1,400 guns, every piece the Wehrmacht could spare, unleashed a barrage that tore through American positions. In the darkness and chaos, German infantry advanced behind the fire, infiltrating American lines using tactics perfected on the Eastern Front. The initial impact was catastrophic for American units. The 106th Division, caught in the main axis of attack, was surrounded and decimated. 2 entire regiments surrendered after days of isolated fighting. It was the largest mass surrender of American forces in the European theater. German commanders felt vindicated. The Americans, as predicted, were breaking. Oberst Otto Remmer, commanding the Führerbegleiter Brigade, reported back enthusiastically, "The Americans fight from fixed positions and surrender when flanked. They have no understanding of fluid battlefield. We are advancing as planned. The Americans are in full retreat." But something unexpected was happening. While forward units were being overrun, the American military machine was responding with mechanical efficiency. Phone lines to Corps headquarters lit up with reports. Staff officers began moving units on map boards. Artillery battalions received coordinates. Air Force bases put fighters and bombers on alert. The logistical apparatus that German planners had dismissed as cumbersome bureaucracy began functioning like an industrial assembly line, processing battlefield chaos into organized response. At Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, General Dwight Eisenhower demonstrated the difference between German and American command philosophy. German generals tended to fight forward, personally leading attacks. Eisenhower fought from a map room, coordinating resources. Within hours of the German attack, he had committed his only reserves, the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. He ordered Patton's Third Army to disengage from its offensive and drive north. He authorized unrestricted ammunition expenditure. Most significantly, he told his logistics officers to strip every depot in Europe if necessary to keep combat units supplied. This was total war, fought with spreadsheets and supply manifests, and the Germans had nothing comparable. The Wehrmacht's logistics were based on horse-drawn wagons and captured trucks running on synthetic fuel. They calculated offensives based on captured supplies. The Americans calculated battles based on production capacity in Detroit and Pittsburgh. The defense of Bastogne became the symbolic center of the American response, and it perfectly illustrated the difference between the two armies. The 101st Airborne Division rushed north in freezing weather aboard trucks, arrived just as German pincers were closing around the vital road junction. They had no winter clothing, limited ammunition, and were outnumbered 3-1 by attacking German forces. German commanders expected quick surrender. Instead, when General Lieutenant Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz sent surrender demands, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded with a single word: nuts. The response baffled German officers unfamiliar with American slang, but the meaning became clear as American paratroopers established a defensive perimeter that German attacks couldn't break. What sustained the Bastogne defenders wasn't martial spirit or tactical genius. It was industrial capacity. Despite being surrounded, American transport planes dropped 950 tons of supplies into the perimeter. Artillery ammunition, medical supplies, food, even artillery pieces were parachuted in. When German attacks intensified, American artillery battalions fired predetermined defensive barrages that consumed more ammunition in single nights than German units possessed for entire battles. Hauptmann Hans von Luck, commanding a panzer battalion in the attack, encountered this firepower firsthand. We attacked an American position near Bastogne on December 22nd. The usual tactics: infiltrate at night, attack at dawn, overwhelm them before they can organize. What happened instead defied everything I knew about warfare. We hadn't even reached their lines when the world exploded. Artillery from every direction, so concentrated you couldn't identify individual shells, just continuous thunder. We lost half our armor before seeing a single American soldier. This wasn't fighting. This was industrial murder. The American logistical response to the Ardennes Offensive remains one of history's great organizational achievements. Within days, the U.S. Army moved 250,000 men and 50,000 vehicles into the battle area. They established supply lines that delivered 60,000 tons of ammunition, fuel, and supplies daily. They built field hospitals that could handle thousands of casualties. They cleared roads, established fuel dumps, and maintained communications across a fluid battlefield. German commanders watched in disbelief as American units they had defeated days earlier reappeared fully equipped and resupplied. Captured American supply dumps revealed stacks of equipment that exceeded entire German division inventories. Wehrmacht intelligence officers examining captured American positions found ammunition expenditure that seemed impossible. A single American infantry company had fired more rifle ammunition in one engagement than a German regiment received monthly. The weather cleared on December 23rd, and the full weight of American air power arrived over the battlefield. What German troops experienced next was unlike anything in their previous combat experience. Medium bombers struck in formations of 300 aircraft, dropping 500-pound bombs on German concentrations. Fighter bombers patrolled constantly, attacking any vehicle movement. Even individual German soldiers became targets as P-47 Thunderbolts strafed with 8.50 caliber machine guns. Lieutenant Gustav Knittel, a veteran of 4 years' combat on the Eastern Front, later described the experience. The Russians had air power, but nothing like this. The sky was full of American planes, all day, every day. They destroyed our supply columns, shot up our tanks, killed our infantry. We couldn't move in daylight. We couldn't concentrate forces. We couldn't resupply forward units. It wasn't a battle. It was systematic destruction from above. The Luftwaffe's attempt to contest American air superiority on January 1st, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte, demonstrated how completely the balance had shifted. Nearly 900 German fighters attacked Allied airfields in a desperate attempt to destroy grounded aircraft. They succeeded in destroying several hundred planes on the ground. But the operation cost the Luftwaffe 271 aircraft and 213 pilots, including many irreplaceable instructors. Within 48 hours, American airfields had been resupplied with factory-fresh aircraft flown in from England. The Germans lost pilots they could never replace. A captured Luftwaffe pilot, brought before American intelligence officers, who pointed at replacement aircraft already arriving, captured the German dilemma. You can replace machines. We cannot replace men. That is why you will win. The American counteroffensive began on January 3rd, 1945, and it showcased the doctrine that German generals had dismissed as unimaginative. There was nothing elegant about the American attack. It was methodical, overwhelming, and built entirely around firepower. Artillery barrages preceded every advance. Tank infantry teams moved behind rolling barrages. When resistance was encountered, American forces didn't maneuver around it. They called in additional artillery, airstrikes, or both, and destroyed it. General Major Otto Remer, whose unit had advanced confidently in December, found himself in desperate retreat by mid-January. We couldn't stop them. Not because they were better soldiers. Our men were still superior in the small unit tactics. But they didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like machine operators. Encounter resistance, call artillery insufficient, call air support insufficient. Bring up tanks. They had unlimited resources and used them without hesitation. We had courage. They had factories. Factories won. The Battle of the Bulge cost the Wehrmacht 100,000 casualties, 800 tanks, and the last of Germany's mobile reserves. American casualties were similarly high, 80,000 total, but the difference was in replacement capacity. Within weeks, American divisions were back to full strength, with fresh troops and new equipment. German losses were irreplaceable. More significantly, the battle destroyed any remaining German illusions about American military capability. After the Ardennes, no German general would again dismiss American forces as amateurs. They had learned the hard way that industrial capacity was its own form of military genius. The interrogation reports of senior German officers captured in 1945 reveal this transformation in thinking. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, chief of operations for the Wehrmacht High Command, was asked about the failure of the Ardennes Offensive. His response was remarkably candid. We made two fundamental errors. First, we assumed the Americans would fight like Europeans, that their units would panic when surrounded, that their commanders would hesitate when surprised. Instead, they fought systematically, using their material superiority to compensate for tactical inexperience. Second, we underestimated their logistical capacity. We planned based on capturing American supplies. We didn't realize they could maintain multiple armies in continuous combat indefinitely. They turned warfare into industrial production. We brought swords to a factory. The transformation of the American military from 1941 to 1945 remains one of history's most remarkable achievements. In 4 years, the United States took a peacetime army of 190,000 men and created a force of 8.3 million. More impressively, they equipped this force with unprecedented material abundance. By war's end, American factories had produced 88,410 tanks and self-propelled guns, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2.4 million trucks, 41 billion rounds of ammunition, 297,000 aircraft, 6,500 naval vessels. These weren't just numbers. Each represented industrial capacity that dwarfed anything in human history. The United States produced more war material in 1944 alone than Germany and Japan, combined produced during the entire war. More significantly, this production was sustained while maintaining civilian prosperity and feeding allied nations worldwide. The German military had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. The Americans had spent 4 years perfecting the industry of war. In the Ardennes, these two philosophies collided, and industrial capacity proved more powerful than martial tradition. The psychological impact on German forces was profound. Veterans who had conquered most of Europe, who had fought from Africa to the Arctic Circle, spoke of American combat power in tones of awe, bordering on despair. The problem wasn't that American soldiers were better. Many German veterans maintained they were individually inferior. The problem was that individual capability became irrelevant when facing industrial-scale firepower. A Wehrmacht training document captured in March 1945, titled Combat Against American Forces, revealed how completely German tactical thinking had adapted. American infantry relies heavily on supporting fires. They will call artillery on targets that would require only small arms fire from German troops. Do not assume they lack courage. They are following doctrine that emphasizes firepower over maneuver. When attacking American positions, expect immediate and heavy artillery response. American units can bring battalion-level fires in minutes, division-level fires within the hour. When possible, engage at ranges where they cannot call fire support. When not possible, accept that casualties will be severe. The document's fatalistic tone demonstrated how thoroughly German confidence had eroded. The army that had conquered Europe in weeks now published defensive guidance on merely surviving contact with American forces. The final collapse of German resistance in the West came with shocking speed once the Rhine was crossed in March 1945. American armies, fully supplied and equipped, advanced at rates that exceeded even the 1940 German Blitzkrieg. The difference was that American advances were sustainable. Supply lines kept pace with combat units. Fuel trucks arrived before tanks ran dry. Ammunition stocks never depleted. The logistical tail that German planners had dismissed as cumbersome bureaucracy proved to be America's decisive weapon. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, taking command in the West during the final months, recognized the futility. I inherited an impossible situation. American material superiority was absolute. For every German tank, they had 20. For every artillery shell we fired, they fired 100. For every gallon of fuel we possessed, they had 1,000. Training, courage, and tactical skill became irrelevant against such disparity. We weren't defeated by better soldiers. We were buried under an avalanche of steel. The meeting between American and Soviet forces at the Elbe River in April 1945 provided a final contrast in military philosophy. Soviet soldiers, hardened by 4 years of brutal warfare, expected to meet fellow warriors. What they found were well-fed American troops who fought with radios and jeeps and seemed to view warfare as a technical problem requiring proper equipment rather than a test of martial spirit. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, visiting American positions, was astounded by the logistics. Their soldiers live better in the field than our officers in Moscow. Every unit has trucks, radios, abundant supplies. They waste ammunition like water, call in artillery for single snipers, use aircraft like flying artillery. It is not efficient by our standards, but it is effective. They have made war into mass production. In the decades after the war, military historians debated whether American victory was inevitable, given industrial capacity, or whether German skill could have prevailed under different circumstances. The question misses the fundamental point. The Americans didn't try to beat Germany at their own game. They changed the game entirely. The Wehrmacht represented the pinnacle of traditional military art. Professional soldiers, sophisticated tactics, operational brilliance. The U.S. Army represented something new, industrial warfare, where factories mattered more than field marshals, where logistics determined victory more than courage, where the side that could deliver more shells per minute prevailed regardless of individual soldier quality. In 1985, at a reunion of Ardennes veterans in Belgium, a panel of German and American commanders discussed the battle. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, the same officer who had dismissed American troops as children playing soldier in December 1944, offered his final assessment. We were arrogant. We saw American soldiers who couldn't march in step, who saluted casually, who called their officers by first names, and we assumed they couldn't fight. We were wrong. They didn't need to march in step because they rode in trucks. They didn't need formal military courtesy because they communicated effectively without it. They had created a military system optimized for industrial warfare, and we never understood until too late. In the Ardennes, we thought we would shatter them with superior tactics and warrior spirit. Instead, they absorbed our best punch and responded with methodical, overwhelming force. They called in artillery that made our own fires seem like pistol shots. They brought up tanks when we had only infantry. They supplied their surrounded units by air, while our forward formations starved. The Americans didn't defeat us through military genius. They defeated us through industrial capacity, so vast it made military genius irrelevant. They understood that in modern warfare, the side that can deliver more tonnage of explosives wins. Everything else is commentary. I stopped laughing at American soldiers on December 23, 1944, when their counterattack began. By January, I feared them more than the Soviets. The Russians would kill you. The Americans would bury you under firepower so intense you ceased to exist. There is a difference. The Battle of the Bulge marked the last time German generals would underestimate American military capability. It demonstrated conclusively that the United States had created something unprecedented, a military system that turned industrial capacity into combat power with ruthless efficiency. The amateur army of citizen soldiers, backed by the arsenal of democracy, had defeated the professional military elite of Europe, not through superior tactics or greater courage, but through a uniquely American approach to warfare. Overwhelming material superiority, standardized training, and doctrine built around firepower rather than finesse. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, German laughter had died with their soldiers. The Americans, it turned out, hadn't been playing at war. They had been revolutionizing it.